Today we're starting a brand new message series called The Harvest Principle. We're going to take this next month to examine an incredibly rich principle that governs all of life, the harvest principle. And it seems fitting this time of the year. There's something about the rural lifestyle that seems particularly inspiring during autumn. If you have kids, perhaps you visited a farm this fall to pick some pumpkins or to get lost in a corn maze. Or perhaps you're an autumn enthusiast, just thrilled to deck out your porch with scarecrows and leaves, and maybe even to drink one too many pumpkin spice lattes. All this seasonal inspiration gives us the perfect backdrop for the harvest principle. A principle is essentially a ground rule for life. A principle tends to work whether you like it or not, whether you believe it or not, or whether you know it or not. It's just written into the laws of nature. And it doesn't care if you're a conservative or a liberal, if you're a Christian or a Muslim or nothing at all. So if you're not a church person, if you've decided to come here for the first time, or for the first time in a long time, you've picked the perfect day to join us because you can benefit from this principle wherever you're at. Sometimes we can look around and see exceptions to the principles, someone or something that flies in the face of it, and we're tempted to think that the principle isn't true. For example, gravity. Gravity is written into the law of nature, but at times we seem to defy gravity because we're able to fly in airplanes. But eventually, gravity wins. The plane does have to land. It cannot stay up there forever. And let me make one other point before we dig down deep into this principle. This principle is sometimes used to reproach others, to spread blame and guilt and make people feel sad and bad about their past choices. So I know that there is a negative connotation to this right off the bat, but we're going to tackle it, and we're going to tackle it in a very positive way, head on. The harvest principle goes like this. You reap what you sow. You reap what you sow. It's the basic principle of life that we get from agriculture and from farming. You plant a seed in the ground, and if it receives the proper rain and the right amount of sunlight, eventually you will reap and receive the effects of what you've planted. And you reap in kind with what you have sown. That means if you plant a tomato seed, you get a tomato. You plant corn, you get corn, and only corn. You reap and receive as you sow, and everything reproduces in its kind. This principle reminds us that our actions matter, and they will impact outcomes for our living. What you do or what you fail to do now impacts your future. If you're at a place right now in any area of your life, your finances, your marriage, your professional life, your fitness, if you're at a place in your life where you don't want to be, chances are, not 100%, but chances are that you have sowed and reaped yourself there. And likewise, if you're at a place in your life, anywhere in your life, that you are satisfied about, chances are you have sowed and reaped yourself there too. On a personal level, you can probably look back at some really good things your parents and grandparents or other family members did for you, gave to you, sacrificed for you, that laid a foundation of love and sacrifice, of faith and of values that you rely upon today, or that you depend upon today. It's true that not everything in our lives is a result of what we've sown for ourselves, but everything in our lives, or nearly everything we sow, will yield something for ourselves or for others. Now let me pause to make a very important distinction. This principle is not karma. You know what karma is, right? You've heard that word. It's not karma. Karma is a belief in ancient Asian religions that what you do in this life shapes what you have or what or who you are in the future, in a future life. So just so that we're all on the same page, Christians do not believe in karma. We don't believe in reincarnation. You got that? We're on the same page? Good. Because after this life, I don't want to come back as a dog. I want to go to heaven. While this principle is not exclusively Christian, it is found throughout our scriptures. It's mentioned in the book of Proverbs, in the book of Isaiah, and most specifically in St. Paul's letter to the Galatians, where St. Paul says this, "Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows." So that's the main principle. But there are two correlating principles that are important to understand if you're ever going to appreciate this main principle. The first is that you reap what you sow, but it's always later. It's always later. You don't plant a seed today, and tomorrow suddenly you have the harvest. It takes time. This is why this principle can be very frustrating and even deceiving. It requires patience and sometimes even vigilance. You don't go on a diet today and suddenly tomorrow you've lost a ton of weight. You eat right over time. It takes time. And over that time, you see the results. You don't pick up a language or a musical instrument overnight. You don't kick an addiction or a bad habit overnight. And suddenly it's become easy. It's difficult. And it's difficult for a long time. But you do end up reaping what you sow, but later. This principle is also difficult to keep sight of because there are so many people around us who seem to defy it, right? Students, you know this. You can think of lots of people at your school who are goofing off and going out at night and doing shady stuff, and they're getting away with it. Or you can think of people at work who are coming in late, spending company time on personal stuff, and creating more work for you. And no one seems to even notice. Or maybe it is you. You're not exactly being faithful to your spouse because she's so busy with the kids, she can't notice. And you need affection, and you need attention. You deserve it. And no one's getting hurt. No one needs to know. None of these things seem to really matter initially, but eventually, it's a different story. And this helps us to order our lives rightly. I mean, we hear about it in today's gospel. Jesus gives us 2 commandments, 2 priorities to live by, and spoiler alert, neither one places me or what I want at the top of the list. Check this out. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your mind, and all your soul, and all your strength, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So sure, placing God or someone else above yourself may not reap immediate gratification, but it will reap a reward. And you can bet that over time, the things that you make important in your life will shape your life. And that brings us to the second important result of this principle, which goes like this. You reap what you sow, but it's always greater. It's always greater. You can see this most specifically in your children. You invest your time, you invest yourself, and you get to witness their amazing transformation into adult life. You reap what you sow, but it's always greater. Today we want to look at one specific application of this principle, the application of this principle when it comes to your character. What is your character? What is your character? Character is the aggregate of features and traits that form the very core nature of someone, which is a God-given thing. One of the many things parents love to discover about their kids is their emerging character traits. And no character is good or bad in the beginning. It just is, initially. But over time, your thoughts and feelings shape your actions and form your habits. And eventually, each and every decision you make and turn you take influences and shapes your character. And your character, my friends, affects every other aspect and area of your life. It's a factor in everything that happens to you. It becomes who you are. And it is the single thing that you get to take to heaven with you. You reap what you sow when it comes to your character. And you reap later and greater. People who sow the wrong character seeds are headed down a very difficult path that can include a whole host of unfortunate and unhelpful behaviors and attitudes that range from the merely unattractive to the downright self-destructive. And we've all seen that. We've all seen that. On the other hand, people who are sowing the right kind of character seeds, they can flourish and they can exceed and enjoy nearly limitless advantages. And we've seen that too. We can find Jesus' own template for sowing great character in ourselves in his most famous sermon. And you probably know what I'm talking about. It is found in St. Matthew's Gospel in the 5th, 6th, and 7th chapters. It's called the Sermon on the Thank you. It begins with Jesus listing the Beatitudes. Now that word simply means blessings and happiness, or happiness. Because the Beatitudes describe the type of character traits that bring blessings or happiness to our lives. Each Beatitude consists of two phrases: the desired habit, the seed, if you will, and the subsequent result that this habit yields. We call that the fruit. What Jesus is describing in the Beatitudes is his own blueprint for living. Now, the Beatitudes do seem to be counterintuitive. For instance, he says, "Blessed are the poor." Blessed are the poor. What does that mean? Well, surely poverty is not an aspirational value of Christianity, nor do poor people necessarily have greater character. But he's not talking about economic poverty here. He's talking about poverty of spirit before God, a habit of the heart that acknowledges our need for God and the availability of his divine assistance. The first attribute of a healthy character is simply an acknowledgement that there is a God, and it isn't me, but I can turn to him for assistance. In turn, Jesus promises the kingdom of God is designed for these type of people. He says, "Blessed are the meek." Meekness is not much of a value when it comes to our culture today, and yet here it is on his list. That's because meekness takes that idea of poverty of spirit to a whole new level. With meekness, we make ourselves teachable and coachable and malleable in the hands of God. Meekness is the quality that he seeks when it comes to working with us. In turn, he promises that these people will, one way or another, ultimately come out ahead. He says, "Blessed are those who mourn." What is referred to here is a habit of the heart that experiences empathy. Empathy is a genuine concern for others, especially for those in need. It's a disposition of real regret for suffering and the effects of evil that exist in the world. Counterintuitively, he promises comfort and consolation can be found in this kind of a habit. He says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice." This is the development of the desire for growth and progress in every area of our life: religious, moral, personal, and even interpersonal. A person with this character trait is never satisfied with the status quo, but can always imagine more and greater things, goodness in life. In fact, this type of person hungers for that more. In turn, Jesus promises to these people that more will be given to them. He says, "Blessed are the merciful." Here, the habit of the heart becomes an action step. And it works in the world. At its most basic, mercy is just aid to those in need. Its exercise is richly rewarding because as we give it away, we increase our capacity to receive it from God. He says, "Blessed are the pure of heart." Now, it's not exclusively referring to chastity here. Purity of heart is also about things like honesty and integrity. That actually allows us to see things more clearly and more distinctly. And when it's cultivated over time, it allows us to actually see God. This is what Jesus promises, to see God in the sense of seeing God at work in my life every day. He says, blessed are the peacemakers. These people not only live in peace with others, but they propose and promote peace among other people. They're actively bringing peace into each encounter, into every situation that they find themselves in. Such ones as these, Jesus promises, are most authentically named the children of God, because they're reflecting God in his own work as the creator. As peacemakers, they're restoring harmony in creation. Finally, he says, blessed are those who suffer persecution. This sounds tough, but this is literally all about the courage of our convictions. People of strong character stand up for what they believe in. They're willing to suffer as a form of service for what is true. You reap what you sow, and you will reap it later and greater. That's the truth that we do well to recognize and honor in our lives. It's a fact that can help us understand our past and what's happened to us there. But it's not a heavy stick to just beat ourselves up with and feel bad about ourselves. Instead, you can think of it as a tool that you can use and leverage to your advantage as we move forward. So as we kick off this series, I invite you to consider where you may have a nagging feeling. Maybe it's the feeling that you're planting the wrong kind of seeds, bad seeds. Perhaps you think that you could be planting different seeds, better seeds. Where is that in your life? In your health, in your finances, in your marriage, with your kids, with your relationships, and with your relationship with God. I challenge you to take that to prayer this week. Sometime this week, over your quiet time, talk about the seeds that you're sowing with God. Because as important and as powerful as the reality of the harvest principle is, it's important to acknowledge another reality of life, one that's even more important and more powerful. And that is the reality of mercy and grace. You know, you are not defined by your past. You are not the sum total of your missteps and your mistakes. Whatever it is that you have sown and reaped yourself into currently, that can change. That can change because you can change. You can start sowing another harvest, a different harvest, a greater harvest.